Welcome. Thanks for stopping by. My name is Sharon R. Pender, President and CEO of the Capital Region Minority Supplier Development Council, but I'm also the operator of the U.S. Department of Commerce MBDA Business Center, Washington, D.C., and the Federal Procurement Center. We service the greater Washington, D.C. area, the state of Maryland, and Northern Virginia. Welcome to our HOTCHAT Podcast, Minority Business Connections, Season 1. This is Episode 3. Today, we're featuring Ambassador Tom Fong. We're discussing the rise in Asian American hate crimes that have been impacting this community over recent months since the onset of the pandemic. But we may find that this is not a new conversation. I guarantee you this conversation will be insightful, informative. So sit back, relax, and stay tuned. It is our mission to continue to feature dynamic one-on-one conversations with CEOs, contracting officers, minority businesses, supplier diversity professionals, and procurement leaders from some of the leading companies in America via our HOTCHAT podcast discussions. We will highlight challenges, success stories, resources, and opportunities that exist for our vast network of minority businesses, and we will spotlight our corporate members and partners who share our vision to drive economic development, equity, and inclusion within their organizations across this country. But more importantly, we'd like to hear from you as we curate topics and that may be of interest to you. After this podcast, please go to our contact page and share any questions or information you may have via our website, which is crmsdccares.com. So before we get started and bring on Ambassador Tom Fong, Chinese American from the Chinese American Heritage Foundation, I'd like to give recognition of some of our sponsors. In terms of our title sponsor, that's Exelon, which is BGE and Pepco and Exelon Company, Southwest Airlines, the Hilton, Amicus, Capital One, CompuGain, JDC Events, SB and Company, and Stroud and Priest. Thank you. And we are very grateful for the commitments of those sponsors as we move forward with bringing to you relative information. Before I bring him up, let me tell you a little bit about Ambassador Tom Fong. Tom Fong is a third generation Washingtonian, having grown up in the Adams Morgan, Washington, D.C., where he witnessed the beauty and the turmoil, quite frankly, of the 1960s capital city. His family moved to Silver Spring, Maryland when he was a teen, and he went on to study finance and economics at the University of Maryland. He worked on a number of government contracting firms prior to launching his own technology company or venture, Infotech Systems, Concierge, and Red Carpet Cloud. He currently directs business development at MITA Technologies, a Bethesda-based technology recruiting firm. Mr. Fong is currently the DMV ambassador to the Chinese American Heritage Foundation, as I shared, where he is spearheading a 30-plus city National Day of Solidarity Against Hate. On Memorial Day, May 31st of this year, the DC rally will mirror those across the nation with a day of hope, healing, and love over hate. The 90-minute ceremony will feature speakers, musical performances, and more. So if I could just say hello to my friend, Ambassador Tom Fong. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Sharon. Good to see you.
Always good to see you. And thank you again for spending the time with us, because this conversation is very, very important. And so I just could not let another time go by without taking the opportunity to let us express what that is. So, Tom, let me first say to you, tell our audience that you and I met going through an experience of the Greater Washington Leadership program, and LGW, Leadership Greater Washington, the best class. Now, that has been verified, correct, by the director of the
Absolutely.
program. After years of having other classes, he keeps saying that we're the best class. So there must be some truth to it. But it was a great experience because it kind of led me to meeting you. And so love, you and I have talked about it. I know that you grew up in the DNB. But I was always fascinated when you and I talked about Chinatown and some of that history. So we're going to talk about some of the things that are happening today in terms of the hate culture. But let's start by, I just love the history of the DC Chinatown. Could you just tell us a little bit about it?
Well, Washington, D.C. Chinatown has always been near and dear to my heart and that of my family. Both of my grandfathers settled in Washington, D.C., were restaurateurs. One actually had restaurants in Washington's Chinatown, my paternal grandfather. He had the Republic restaurant in Chinatown, while my maternal grandfather had a restaurant in Adams Morgan in Washington, D.C. And he was actually the only grandfather that I knew. My paternal grandfather passed away before I was born. But he was also one of the leaders in Chinatown back even before Chinatown was at 7th and 8th Street, where it is now with the arch. Prior to its current location, it was located down on Constitution Avenue and 5th and 6th Street. But through eminent domain, that Chinatown was displaced. And for many of the Chinatown residents and businesses, they were given, pennies on the dollar for their properties, and they all decided to try to figure out a different place, and that became 7th and H.
Wow.
And so that's where the quote unquote new Chinatown is in Washington, D.C., 7th and H Street.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the past 30 years, through gentrification and the evolution of Chinese American families into the more Western roles of doctors and lawyers and dentists and engineers and government workers, a lot of the reliance on Chinatown businesses like laundries and curio shops and restaurants has not been as needed. So the flight of Chinatown families out to the suburbs really happened in the 70s and 80s, but particularly after the assassination of Martin Luther King, that really precipitated a lot of the movement out of DC's Chinatown into the suburbs. And my family was not much different. It took us a few years to migrate to Silver Spring, Maryland after 1968. But that's where we ended up, and that's where I went to high school. And then I actually went there from high school to University of Maryland. But Chinatown still remains kind of that touchstone. We'll have big ceremonies down there. For many years, that's where we still attended Chinese banquets for birthday celebrations, and weddings, and also funerals. But for the past several years, 10 years or so, I've been managing the Chinese New Year's Parade, which is kind of Chinatown Super Bowl. Still vibrant. This past year, of course, with COVID, the Chinese New Year celebration did not happen on the streets. It was a virtual celebration. But Chinatown is still very resonant in all our hearts, and that's what we think about when we come to celebrate together as a community. And I think the broader community does see DC's Chinatown as same thing is, when it's Chinese New Year's or other big Chinese celebrations, Chinatown is the center point. So it's still near and dear to our hearts.
Hmm. That's very, very interesting. So can you tell us, so in terms of the um, generational piece, so your grandfather was in the restaurant business, correct?
Yes,
Did that pass down in generational in your family?
it did. We grew up as part of his staff. It was a family-run business, so whether you're 7 years old or or my mom, the main cook uh, at the restaurant, it did pass down to us. Uh, and I actually ran with my brother and some other partners, a deli and catering business for a few years. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but currently, we do not run restaurants. Our family still owns the building in Outis Morgan where my uh, maternal grandfather ran Bing's Carryout. I joke around with my friends. He ran one of the biggest franchises in America. That Chinese carryout seafood chicken franchise.
Is that
Of course,
right?
it's a one-off business for him, but I mean, you see so many of them, especially in urban areas,
Mm-hmm.
across the country.
Okay. So Chinatowns across the country, I would imagine, rich in history as well. Are there ever connections with Chinatowns? The largest one, is that still in San Francisco, New York?
I believe the largest one is San Francisco, followed closely by New York.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many offshoots. So in San Francisco, there are Chinatowns in other areas like Sunset, in Los Angeles. The old Chinatown is in downtown Los Angeles, but then you go out to Orange County and other places, and there's just thriving areas of Asian and Chinese businesses and restaurants. Same thing in New York. That
Mm-hmm.
moves out into Brooklyn and Queens. And even here in Washington, D.C., a lot of the Chinese restaurants are more so opening up in Rockville and Wheaton, and as well as in Virginia. But, the spread is definitely continuing. Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like Chinatown has been used as that central point to kind of maintain some culture. And it sounds like it's still a focal point for some engagement and entertainment and that kind of thing. And it seems like you've also kept connected, because I know that you work with some youth, because you shared that with us at one of our top 100 award ceremony was
Yes.
that youth organization
Chinese Youth Club.
that's right, that
So
came and
very,
performed for
very,
us.
very important part of,
Mhm.
DC Chinatown is the Chinese Youth Club of Washington, D.C. It's been around for almost 100 years. I think it was started in 1930s. I think they just celebrated 80 years, but still thriving, keeping youth active in basketball, volleyball, cultural things like lion dance. It's the center of the Chinese New Year's parade. And I'm a former president of the Chinese Youth Club and still a very active member. All my kids grew up making friends and keeping off the mean streets of Bethesda through
Mhm.
CYC. A little joke there. But
Mhm.
CYC is also part of the Chinatown community. There's an umbrella group, CCBA, which is the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, which has about 30 organizations under it, family associations, of course, the Chinese churches, Chinese singing groups, etc., all part of the CCBA umbrella. And
Okay.
CCBA basically helps run the Chinatown and the greater community here.
Okay, wonderful. So tell us about the being an ambassador to the Chinese American Heritage Foundation. What is it? Tell me about the foundation and what does it mean for you to be an ambassador? And then I want to talk about maybe some things you saw growing up in the DC area, but does that prepare you for what you're seeing around the country today? So,
Sure.
mhm.
So the Chinese American Heritage Foundation is based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and the president is Mr. Wilson Lee, who was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and is a former Chinese Youth Club kid as well.
Mm.
The CAHF is a group that brings culture and pride to the Chinese American community across the United States. Some of its biggest efforts, reenacting the railroad building when at Promontory Point in Utah, when both railroads met and they were completed, the east to west. There was a big picture of the culmination of that event, but the original picture showed no Chinese men,
Mm.
which is a little revisionist history because it was a lot of Chinese men who worked and slaved and died in pulling that humongous feat together. And to have no Chinese represented in that original picture was, big slight. And so CAHF pulled together a reunion of sorts with the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of many of those workers for that event. We've also pulled together the first Rose Parade float in American history that spotlighted that very, very same event, the railroads meeting and the importance of Chinese workers in pulling that together.
Mm-hmm.
And then another big impetus for CAHF is the commemoration of Chinese American World War II veterans. And the Congressional Gold Medal this past year and a half has been significant in making sure that America knows that Chinese Americans have been a part of, American history for generations. And that was a very important piece of legislation that was passed in both houses of Congress, and the Chinese American World War II veterans Congressional Gold Medal is very significant.
To listen to those stories, it sounds very parallel, right, to things that African Americans definitely have been through as well. The revisionist history, being left out of stuff, not given credit for building the country and those kinds of things. So it's very interesting to hear the similarities. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are so many parallels to the struggles of non-white, to the people of color in America, and the importance of what our people have brought to this great country. And for those significant milestones and inventions and additions to what we have as a country is shameful.
Yeah.
And, it's really just kind of our job to make sure that those aren't just pushed aside, and so that we can all understand how did we get to where we are as a country, culturally, politically, technologically, educationally, just all aspects of how we build this country. And in every way, whether it's from the Black, Latino, Hispanic, Asian, just whatever perspective, there are contributions all the way down to the nitty gritty. And those contributions must be understood so that we can all have a mutual respect when we come to that table and understand how did we build this country. And it wasn't just from, the majority's hands. Minorities and new minorities are contributing in great ways.
And the recognition, and that collectively as minorities, this country, the demographics of this country is totally turning. And I think that, particularly from a business perspective as well, that there has to be some attention. There's no question having some attention paid to minority businesses because of the fact, if nothing else, the sheer numbers. But let me ask you a question.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. So I think about my grandson, for example, who's 8 years old, and I look at the social unrest, the social injustice that's taking place in this country, and I'm saddened by the fact that he has to be taught a certain behavior culture to keep him alive. Because you just saw what happened yesterday. I mean, it was 2 days ago now, back in Minneapolis, or the suburbs of Minneapolis, and it's the George Floyd trial is taking place now, and then just all last year with COVID, but also the unrest, the Breonna Taylor, and those kinds of things. What do you teach your children as it relates to the culture of hate in this country?
Well, I try to take the high road in teaching my kids about what exists out there. I believe it stems from misunderstanding, lack of understanding of contributions of people of color, that the systemic bias that is inherent in how we need to live today needs to be corrected. That when you look at a certain person and you're automatically judging them by the color of their skin or other immaterial ways, then that's wrong. And that's going to lead to continued issues. And so that's where we've got to come to the table and say, with mutual respect, with an understanding that this person of color could have contributed mightily to how we've gotten to where we are, how the strides that we've made. That's where we're going to be able to say, you know what? I can't be biased when I'm a police officer and I pull over, a person driving and they're black. And guess what? All of a sudden, I'm treating them differently than if I pulled over someone who is a white American or Hispanic American or Asian American. We've got to fix that.
Yeah.
So it is something that I believe we need to have genuine, respectful discourse about.
Yeah.
So that we can root out, the incidents of bias that undermine everything that we're seeing today.
Yeah. Tom, when I saw what hurts my heart in particular is when people are beating up on elderly people. And when I saw that particular incident of the Asian woman that was knocked down and beaten, and they had the shot from inside, I think a hotel or something, and they showed the people the woman was on the ground, and they showed the people, men, who had closed the door. What was the conversation around your dinner table when you see that, or when you saw that?
It was just a reminder of the many generations of how America has treated Asians as others. I think back to the times when I went around the restaurant with my grandfather. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and he would teach me how to fix things around the restaurant. But one time he stopped and just said, I'm going to tell you a story about when I was a little kid, when I was wearing my hair in a long queue, long queue in the back. And I walk around and those, excuse me here, but we call them white devils. The white devils will yank my queue every day.
Mm.
And I was taken aback, and
Mm-hmm.
in my silly youth, youthful mind, I said to my grandfather, "Why didn't you just beat him up, Gong Gong?" And he looked at me, kind of like I'm a crazy little boy. Boy, you never even looked at the white devil, let alone try to beat him up. If
Mm.
you did, their friends come and help him stomp and kick you to death. And
My.
just leave you rolled there in the curb, boy. And I was just sitting there, what? And maybe if your friends and cousins had the gumption, a couple nights later they come and get your body and take you and bury you somewhere. And that just absolutely, I kept that as a sort of a deep, dark secret in my mind and my heart and my soul
Sure.
for many years. And I found out he never even told that story to my brothers and sisters. And until I was an adult, did I share that with my siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me goosebumps just talking about it right now.
Sure.
But that was really him telling me a true, instance of how he survived the brutal years of his youth in
Sure.
America, trying to just survive. Yeah.
Hmm.
But that's what that video showed me, was that, after 100 years of Chinese in America, there's really been, not been much, difference in how people of color, and particularly here of Asians, have been respected or disrespected. There hasn't been a lot of change.
Yeah. So it sounds like the National Day of Solidarity Against Hate is a step toward making that known. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. And so a few weeks ago, when the atrocious events of Atlanta happened, I
Mm-hmm.
get a call from our national president, Wilson Lee, president of the CHF. And he said, "Tom, please, we need to pull together a day of protest against all this Asian hate."
Hmm.
And so with some dialogue between him and I and others, rather than calling it a day of protest, we felt, it needs to be a day of solidarity. And not just across Asian groups of Chinese and Filipino,
Mm-hmm.
Japanese and Korean, Vietnamese, but really all Americans. And so we're building a very broad base from the Congregation of Black Churches, the Jewish Federation, Hispanic Council, from Blue Lines, the DC Metropolitan Police Foundation is a big supporter, to, red and blue and polka dot and stripe. We are encouraging and nurturing all of America to take Memorial Day weekend, that Monday, the Day of Solidarity, across 30 plus cities, and arm in arm stand up together to fight this four-letter word.
Yeah. Peaceful demonstration.
And that's really what it is. It's going to be a day of hope and healing, and really love over hate.
Mm-hmm.
And with, this message and this the music and the day of hope, hopefully that will incite and catalyze true dialogue and discourse, so
Yeah.
that we can look across the table mutually, respectfully, and get this thing figured out.
You're
How,
right.
how do we have this hate for so long? Because we got to do something different. And hopefully that day which is an important day. It's the end of May, which is AAPI History Month. But it's also a couple of weeks before the anniversary of Vincent Chen's death and murder. And it's also a couple of weeks before Juneteenth.
So, yeah, I love that. So tell us about the murder for our listeners who don't know.
Vincent Chen was a Chinese-American man who lived in Detroit. He was at a bar celebrating with some of his friends a week before his wedding. It was a bachelor party. And two white male auto workers were in the same bar. And I guess a fight ensued. The two white men went to their cars and grabbed baseball bats and met them back outside the bar and bludgeoned them to death with swings of the bat. They never served a day in jail. And the reason why they attacked him, they thought he was Japanese, and their ire was because the Japanese auto industry was taking away good American jobs from people like the two white men. And so that was a big event in Chinese American history and bias in this country, where we saw that systemically people of color, and in that case, the color was yellow, but in many cases it's not yellow, it's brown or it's black. But that's part of the struggle that we all have shared as people of color in America, is that systemic bias can impact us very, very impactfully. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone, and thank you, Tom, for that, for sharing that, because we have to keep hope alive. We have to keep the history alive, right? We have to remind folks of what happened. We look last year at what Black Lives Matter and the peaceful demonstrations that took place across the country. That was solidarity. And so when we look at what's being played at that National Day of Solidarity Against Hate, love the fact that there is going to be a cross-function array of people and groups that are involved. That is so important. So tell us, if we want to be a part of it, where do we get information? How do we get involved?
So the website will be launched very soon, but the website is solidarityagainst.hate.org, and that will be up next 4 or 5 days. But we encourage groups, individuals to come out to the event. The location is going to be in Washington, D.C. It's going to be in Washington, D.C. somewhere. We have not identified that place, so to be determined. But we encourage groups to come out, write your own signs, show the message that this group is, stands up against hate, that we're not going to put up with this anymore. But we want to have that day to be a message of coming together, so that those that would push out hate in the ways that we've seen can see that, wow, that's a true cross section of America. That we are all Americans, and let's find that commonality so that we can build upon that and thrive and go down a path in the future where our children, whatever their colors, don't have to look over their shoulder. That our grandmoms, we all have grandmoms, don't have to walk down the streets afraid that who's next person that might jump on me or perpetrate. So we like to all stand together, and if we can come together in that day that symbolically pushes us towards a better goal and end state, that's really what we're after.
So we have to reverse some of the hate that has gone on. We know that some of it was the rise in it, because it was a sudden. It's been there. The systemic racism has been there, but through the pandemic, was there? You saw that there was this hatred, there's misunderstanding. And Sam, I love your positivity, but even the ignorance of the makeup of Asians, people mistake Koreans from Japanese, from Chinese, and others. And so, how do we get to the point that there is even understanding of the cultures or the differences? And maybe the Heritage Month in May, we can start with even my organization being really focused on how do we continue to educate people about the Asian community. And so I'd like to put that out there, to kind of continue to work, with you on that piece in terms of our businesses of understanding. And I think an understanding then it starts to eliminate the hate. But I'm so proud of what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Sharon. And again, thank you for opening up the dialogue on your podcast here. But I think one thing that I'd like to just say is that, we can all contribute to positivity in our country, whether it's through business, through developing our own technologies and whatnot. But, sharing our culture should help us, almost like when people that work with metal fuse metals together, sometimes that creates a stronger component, metallurgy, and pulling different cultures together, understanding them, and then weave them together into this great fabric that we call America is really what I think we should all get behind. And it's a lot more fun because, we love different foods and different types of dance and music, and having different perspective. That really adds a spice to life. And if we could, kind of seize upon, those great things, but then make it really, really, really apparent in America and how we do things, and embrace that as we move forward, that's really how we're going to get there.
I think it's that. I think you're absolutely right. But in the meantime, let's support the Asian American hate crimes bills. I think that's a solution. Let's support the National Day of Solidarity. And I think that there is the opportunity to begin to understand, and to begin to come together as human beings.
Yes.
Right.
That's fine. We come from so many different places, but truly we're from one place, and that's, our own humanity and our heart and our soul. That's where we come from.
Well, thank you so much, my friend, Tom Fong, ambassador of the Chinese American Heritage Foundation. Thank you for spending the time with us today.
Sharon, thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here, and we hope that you get involved. It was just kind of chilling to then also realize, understand, and remember the parallels of in all of our cultures of hate that has gone on years gone by, and some still being prevalent today. But thank you again for joining this podcast. I appreciate your presence, that you took the time to listen, because part of the solution of all of that is to listen first. We have some corporate members I'd like to thank, and we also have some upcoming events I'd like to mention. In terms of our sponsors, those who are listening, AARP, AT&T, BAE Systems, Bank of America, BWI, Thurgood Marshall International, Dominion Energy, the Ellison Group, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the FRS Company, Horseshoe Casino, part of the Caesars Entertainment, Ideal Electric, Leidos, Lockheed Martin, M&T Bank, McCormick, the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority, the National Bid Network, Marriott, Northrop Grumman, Peapod, Sodexo, Truist, United States Postal Service, Washington Gas, the Metro, the DC Metro, WSSC Water, Wells Fargo, and Zillion Technologies. Thank you. And thank you, and look forward to you joining the Capital Region Minority Supply Development Council and the Minority Business Development Centers that we support for our upcoming event, Super Matchmaker, our Super Matchmaker Roundtable event is on Thursday, June the 24th, and our annual business golf outing is Thursday, September the 21st. Upcoming podcast, we're going to talk to April is actually Financial Literacy Month. And so we're going to bring some conversations to you from David Gardner from Motley Fools, if you want to hear about stocks and that kind of thing. Comptroller Peter Francho, U.S. Senator Ben Cardin, and a special feature as we focus on MBEs, the untold stories of their survival during this pandemic. So again, thank you. And I thank Tom Fong for being a wonderful guest today. I thank the Grabo team for producing, and I thank our CMSCC and MBDA teams and our corporate members for their support. And thank you for joining today. And don't forget to follow us on our social media platforms at CRMSDC. Again, I'm Sharon Pender. Thank you for today, and I'll see you next time.